Right, recording is set. Okay, so welcome all of our attendees and panelists. This is week 9 of the Real Life Librarianship series. If you've never been before, I'm glad you joined us. And if you are one who comes back week after week, we're so happy to see you again. I'm Olivia Morris from Metronet, and I am hosting this along with Ann Walker-Smalley, the Metronet director, who is here on our panel today. You can see on your screen the title card, which tells you the next couple events that we have coming up, and we are planning many more after that. Also at the bottom, you will see the link to the evaluation for this event. I will be sending that out tomorrow, so you will all receive that. But if you are the kind that likes to get a jump start on those things, the link is there for you. I'll leave that up for another moment until we begin. So I wanted to say thank you to our panelists for being here today. Most especially Jen Nelson, who is coming to us live from the airport in Philadelphia. So please bear with us if we have some technical troubles. So far, it seems to be working pretty well, but you never know what's going to happen. So with that, I think we will begin. And the first question is to introduce yourself. Tell us what is your current job title and where do you work? And then give us a brief description of your agency and where it fits in the Minnesota library landscape. Okay, Jen, I'll let you start.
Okay, thank you, Olivia. Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here. So I work at, I'm the Director of State Library Services, and in some quarters known as the State Librarian, working out of the Department of Education. So we occupy a really weird place in the library community because we don't actually have a library, but we have the library administrative functions that go along with being a state agency. So I'm not exact. I would let others comment on where we fit in the system. We give out money, which I think kids, people appreciate. But we have more of a role of an influencer rather than anything else, since we have no statutory authority to require much of anything from anybody. So, but we love working with the librarians in Minnesota and do a lot of continuing ed and professional development, as well as administering the Library Services and Technology Act grants and construction grants and a number of state aid programs.
Great. Thank you, Jen. Maggie.
Yeah. Thank you, Olivia, for the invitation. When Olivia sent these questions, I said the first question was really the only one I could answer effectively at this point. And so thank you. So I do know my name. It is Maggie Snow, and I'm the director of Minitex. I have been at Minitex since the end of February last year, so not even a year yet. Minitex has a number of different units and departments in it. So we manage the statewide resource sharing and delivery courier services throughout Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, and we do have a relationship with Wisconsin. We also have a cooperative purchasing program that manages the statewide databases for all the libraries, plus other cooperative purchasing opportunities around library supplies and other databases. We also have Minnesota Digital Library, which is historic documents and photos and images. And so we've got a staff of 5 or 6 who work on that regularly. And then we also provide, like State Library Services, we provide professional development around a lot of those pieces that we manage for the state. So I didn't say we are a program of the Office of Higher Education, and we are housed out of the University of Minnesota.
Excellent. Thanks, Maggie. And Liz, and I have muted you, Liz.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, perfect.
Okay. So I'm Liz Reppy. I'm the state law librarian, and given that, I work at the State Law Library, which is located on the Capitol Complex, which has made life interesting in the last month or two. We may not go to work next week. We'll see what happens with protests and whatnot. So we have kind of a strange operation in that we are a public library, but we are part of the Supreme Court. So we're not part of the public library world as much as a lot of public libraries would be, but we certainly are open to the public. You know, the way that we connect to the rest of public libraries in a couple different ways. We, in normal times, have a partnership with St. Paul Public Libraries where we have law librarians go in to 5 different branches in St. Paul and do legal reference. Twice a month, each of the 5 branches, the reference librarian will go in with their laptop and sit there for 3 hours and answer questions for people who are looking for legal information. That's been wonderful. And also in a normal time, as part of my role as state law librarian, I like to do outreach to public libraries. And so I typically send out an email at the beginning of the year saying, hey, if you're looking for a free speaker, I'm happy to come and talk to your library, wherever it is, about any sort of questions people have about legal reference. Typically I get 3 or 4 a year. Libraries will take me up on that, and it's a great way to see the state. It's been kind of fun.
That's great. And I think I forgot to say during my brief introduction that for all of those who are in attendance, please feel free to jump in with questions at any time. We do have some prepared, but I would like to know, and I'm sure our panelists would like to know what you're wondering about. So you can go ahead and use the Q&A function or the chat function at any time if you have a question. We're happy to answer those. And our next question is, now that we've learned a little bit about your agencies, tell us about you. So I would like to know, where did you go to school? And give me a brief overview of the path that you took to get to where you are today. And Liz, I'm going to stick with you.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure if I took a traditional path to where I am, but I started out going to law school, never had any thoughts of being a law librarian or a librarian or anything. I was obviously, as most of us, a big fan of libraries and a user of libraries. Graduated law school, got my first job as an attorney and did not care for it. And I was talking to a friend of mine from law school who had moved to Florida and was working at Stetson Law Library and was getting his MLS. And I was like, tell me about that. What does a law librarian do? And everything that he talked about was stuff that I really was interested in, liked doing. And from that one conversation, I enrolled in library school at St. Kate's and ended up, then that was back when you had to actually finish at Dominican. So my library degree is from Dominican, but that was kind of my path. And then I got my first law librarian job when I was still in library school.
And where was that, Liz?
Chicago Kent Law School.
Okay.
So I was in Chicago and got a job in Chicago and stayed there for a while.
Great. Thank you so much. And Maggie?
I have taken sort of a long and winding path to get here. I went to graduate school at Catholic University in Washington, D.C., and I had my first professional reference job in Jefferson City, Missouri, and then moved up to Minnesota. I was in Austin, Minnesota for about 1.5 years. Worked as a community services librarian there, and then I got a job in Carver County as a branch manager. And on my first day of being a branch manager, the woman who was the children's librarian announced that they were moving, and so she was resigning her position. And so I had to very quickly learn how to do story times, which led me down a path of working a lot with youth services and again with the community, but teenagers and preschoolers and everyone in between. And so from that, I started working my way through the metro area libraries. I was with Minneapolis Public Library as that's where I met Jen Nelson for the first time. We were in the partnerships department together, and I ran the summer reading program and the after school tutoring program for Minneapolis Public. And then I was with Hennepin County, and then moved to Anoka County, where I had moved up into the management team there, and for the last 4 years was director of Anoka County Library before I took the Minitex position. So been all over the country and in a lot of different positions to get here. So.
Great, thanks, Maggie. And Jen. And Jen, I'll remind you, you're muted.
I'll unmute.
There we go. Okay, I think Jen is frozen. I don't know if you can still hear us, Jen, but we seem to have lost connection with you. I can see you, but your screen seems to be frozen and I'm getting no audio. And we've lost her. Okay,
Oh,
hopefully she'll
no.
pop back in just a moment. It's so hard to tell when someone freezes on these things. Like, is it them or is it me? All right. Hopefully she'll pop back in just a moment. Okay, well, I don't want to just sit here with, dead air. So I think what we'll do is we'll just move forward and we can let her tell her story when she comes back. So for Maggie and Liz, pretend you're speaking with someone who has never heard of libraries before. And now describe your job. And Maggie, I'm going to let you go first.
I was hoping you would pick Liz to go first. So Minitex is a network of libraries, of state, academic, public school libraries around Minnesota, and we also work with North and South Dakota. And we share resources. We work to save public libraries money and save time for their staff. And we really work hard for the residents of Minnesota to be able to get the information and the library resources that they would like to read and research.
That's fantastic. See, nothing to worry about there. That was a great answer. Liz.
Well, the state law library is, as I mentioned before, part of the Supreme Court, but also open to the public. And so basically our mission is to provide legal information to people wherever they are at whatever level they are. And so certainly a big part of our role is supporting the research needs of the courts, particularly the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals. We're in the same building as those two courts. And so we are often providing assistance to the judges and justices, law clerks, who tend to be the ones doing the research for the judges and justices. We provide assistance to other government agencies who need legal information, attorneys, practicing attorneys, and then at this point in this past year, our percentage of questions answered from the public has jumped from about 52% to like 65%. So we are, even though we're closed, we're spending a lot of time answering questions from the general public about all number of things, but you can imagine family law, employment, housing, certainly that lots and lots of questions we get about the eviction moratorium. So yeah, that's our overall goal, is just to provide legal information to people.
That is great. Thank you.
Liz, this is Maggie.
Does
your staff kind of specialize in different areas of law, or does everybody, like when you talk about housing law or employment law, do you have staff who kind of specialize in those fields?
Not so much. I mean, all of our reference librarians have a legal background. Everybody has a law degree except for one of our librarians who has a paralegal background. We have one of our librarians was a law clerk to a family court judge in Hennepin County. So she tends to be our person that if we get a tough family law question or like about procedure, we'll go to her. She and I tend to be the ones that do most of the legislative history research assistance, but otherwise, we kind of wear a lot of hats.
That's great. Great question, Maggie. Okay, so we talked a little bit about your library path and sort of how you got to where you are today. And now I'm curious about what made you choose that path in the first place. And if you had chosen to start in a different library field, do you think you'd still have ended up in the same place? Liz.
Gosh, I was just thinking about the path, and I started out as an academic law librarian because typically law school law librarians need a law degree. Law firm law librarians typically don't. Public law librarians are a mix. So I started as an academic, and I worked at Chicago Kent and then Hamlin back when there was a Hamlin Law School. And then I worked for a vendor. I worked for Thomson Reuters doing product development, and really missed being a librarian. And so I got hired as the Washington County Law Librarian, and that's how I got into public law libraries. So it's hard to say. I mean, I really enjoyed being an academic law librarian, but gosh, working as a public law librarian is just a whole different ballgame because the questions that you're dealing with are either things that are actually going through the courts or people who have a case that they're trying to research on their own. So it's all like real life legal issues that people are facing. I don't know. It's hard to say. I love my path that I'm on, where I ended up. But yeah, I probably, when I was an academic, thought I would always be an academic.
Great. Thanks. Maggie?
I have always wanted to be a librarian. This is what I set out to do when I was in high school, so I don't know that I had a path that I was looking to follow. I think have been given a lot of opportunities and had a lot of doors open for me that I was able to walk through and take advantage of those opportunities. So I had, when I was in graduate school, was studying law librarianship. Had good intentions of getting a law degree, but came to my senses fairly quickly after going to graduate school. And so was looking for either an academic or a public library reference position. And from there, just taking advantages of opportunities as they came along. The purpose of moving to Minnesota was for true love. It wasn't for a position. So in some ways, you again take the opportunities that are given to you and learn from them and thrive from them. And you never know where you're going to end up.
Wow, that's fantastic. I will say that I too also considered being a law librarian for like a minute and a half because I have an undergraduate degree in criminal justice, but also came to my senses quite quickly. That's just, you have my admiration, Liz. That is for certain. Your job is hard.
Mine as well. I had done an internship at the law library, University of South Dakota Law Library when I was in college and just loved it. And then got out to Washington, D.C. and it just felt so cutthroat and not South Dakota. And so
True enough. And Maggie, I think you're fairly unique in being one of the few librarians that we've talked to who started out wanting to be a librarian.
yes.
Most of them started in another path altogether and kind of fell into librarianship. So very unique.
Always what I wanted to do.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the basics. And normally when I ask this role, we have people, we're trying to find out, if someone who's listening were to get a job in your field, what are the minimum qualifications and what are the starting salary? But you all being directors and at the top of the heap, if you will, maybe you could talk a little bit about starting salary for the people who work for you. If someone were to come in the door, what qualifications do they need and what sort of salary can they be expecting? Liz.
Well, depending on the position, we have two librarians who are technical services librarians. So they don't have legal backgrounds because I rely on them to do the things that I don't know how to do, like catalog and set up Alma and Aleph and all that kind of stuff that I have no interest in. And so those folks have both have MLS degrees. Our reference librarians, we do want them to have some sort of legal background. We have hired a couple of people who were in library school who already had a law degree but didn't have the MLS but were in library school. Really what I was looking for was somebody who had the legal knowledge and had the interest in being a law librarian enough that they had enrolled in school. You know, I'm sure any of you that have done hiring, I mean, there are a lot of people that think, oh gosh, I could be a law librarian with having no legal or library experience at all. But what I didn't want when I have hired is a bunch of unhappy lawyers who just want something else to do besides practice law. So that's why I have wanted somebody to at least be enrolled in library school, even if they aren't finished. And our librarian role, and I couldn't find the current fiscal year numbers, but from last fiscal year, it was like starting was 48,000 up to 76,000. One of the things that the head of public services and I have been working on is creating a role that's, well, we've actually been working on moving the librarian position up one pay band, and also looking at creating a second level so that we have an internal promotional opportunity. Because right now, your only opportunity for promotion internally, if you're a librarian, is to become a department head, is to become a manager. And so that we're hoping that that salary band will go up. I know that we often, when I look at the public libraries, I see that the public library salary bands are higher than ours. So I've tried to kind of present that to HR that, you know, hey, we need to be paying our people more. So keep on the good fight.
Terrific. And Maggie?
Yeah, I have. We have a number of different kinds of positions at Minitech. So some of the skills, depending on the position that you might be working in, we have reference outreach and instruction librarians who are working directly with the public, and they're doing teaching and instruction. So having some public speaking skills and some background in working with the public. We have staff who do a lot of work with contracts and vendor relationships. So being able to build those relationships with vendors, but then understand the inner workings of a contract and pieces that we need in place for that, and supporting some of that work. We have a lot of staff who do a lot of work digitally and scanning, like with the Minnesota Digital Library. There's a lot of technical pieces to that, a lot of metadata and cataloging background needed for those. And then our resource sharing, which is our biggest department, they do a lot of work, again, understanding collections of libraries across the state, what's available, how to access those, how to get those into the hands of readers and researchers. So a lot of different skills involved. I apologize, I have not looked up the salary schedules for the Minitech staff. I do know that we follow the University of Minnesota. We're going to use their infrastructure. So we follow their policies, and they will be doing a review. They regularly review market rate for comparable positions, and librarians are coming up in the next year or so.
And that's okay. That is public information. So anyone who is listening can absolutely Google that if they're super curious. It just helps, I think, to give people an idea. We do have a questions that have popped up in the Q&A. First from Sally May, and may I say, Sally, thanks for showing up. I'm glad you're able to make it today. And Sally would like to know, Sally also has a comment for Liz saying, good for you for working on an internal promotion and championing a good salary for your library staff.
It's important. It
is important. And then Sally would like to know, is cataloging in law libraries very different?
I wouldn't say that it's very different. We use LC instead of Dewey, but I think a lot of maybe academic universities use LC. I would say for our excellent cataloger, she probably does more original cataloging than a lot of catalogers do. we serve as the archive for the judicial branch, and so we have all kinds of court created things that maybe we have the only one, and so she does original cataloging for those, and then what she's noticed is that other law libraries in town tend to wait for her to catalog a lot of things, and then they copy catalog off of her. So she spends quite a bit of time doing original cataloging. So I'm glad she's very skilled.
Great. And another question is how different is service in the land of COVID, which was going to be one of our questions later in the panel. So let's just talk about it now. Talk to us a little bit, each of you, about the pandemic and how it affects service and your jobs and everything you can think of that you want to tell us about the pandemic. So Maggie.
I had, well, on a personal level, I was only at Minitex for about 10 days before we all went home.
Oh my gosh.
There's probably a third of the staff that I have not yet met in person. So it was a real challenge for me trying to both learn a new organization and a new job and a new way of working all together. So, but the management team at Minitex has just been fabulous, and the staff at Minitex, they are customer service driven, and it has been a real pleasure to, even though it's been a real challenge, it's been a real pleasure to be supported by them. For many of our services, we could fairly easily pivot and work from home. The biggest challenges, I think, were for the resource sharing and the delivery staff, that when all the libraries shut down, they had to figure out almost an entirely new way to work, and with quarantining of books or not quarantining of our books, and what resources were available, what could we do to still make articles or digital services available to researchers and to readers. So they did a lot of work trying to restart resource sharing and delivery, and I think we are getting back up to where we used to be. It has been kind of a shift, as for all of us, I think, learning how to work in a hybrid environment where we have some people on campus and some of us work from home. Minitex has been a very close-knit organization. They like to celebrate a lot. They like to have potlucks. They like to get together and just as a team. And that's been a real challenge for us in this hybrid environment. So we're still kind of norming, trying to figure out what that looks like for us. But other ways, services have been going really well. That for a lot of our instruction or for our webinars and for our conferences, because they are all virtual now, so many more people have been able to attend those and participate, and so our network is growing a little bit. So that's been a real positive thing for us. And so I think it's we're still learning. We're getting through it, and we're focusing on the future here.
I like to hear that there's some positives, and honestly, I think that's been true for a lot of people. This particular series that we're doing right now through Metronet, I don't know if this would have existed without the pandemic. This kind of forced us to think out, and it's been fantastic. And I think a lot of people are realizing there's a lot more we can do online than we previously had thought about. So
right, yep,
great.
Yep.
Liz, what are things like for you?
Well, we closed down basically in March. And we're closed until June. And the head of public services and I were each going in a couple of days a week to gather anything that we needed from the physical collection, anything that we couldn't access from home. Luckily, we have access, we're able to access a lot of our legal resources online, but not everything lives online. And so we did that for several months, and then we opened back up in June as appointment only. And that took a lot of planning, of figuring out how many people did we safely feel like we could have in the library at any one time? How long of appointments did we need? How much time did we need in between each appointment so that we could clean? How long were we going to quarantine books for? Our stacks we decided to close our stacks so that we have big signs saying, staff only in the stacks area, so that people weren't in there touching things and putting it back on the shelf. So we locked down a little bit more at the end of December, as the Chief Justice locked down courthouses. Access to courthouses is strictly, is very limited. And so our building is actually locked right now. In order to get in, you have to have an appointment. You have to press a doorbell on the outside, and then the library is still locked. So we've been really, since December, trying to not have people come in at all, if we can prevent it. We have some folks who are higher risk, and it's just really important that we keep everybody safe. Luckily, our reference desk is enclosed, and so people can't really get any closer to the librarian than the librarian is okay with. So that has helped a lot. But luckily, the court has been very supportive of keeping staff of the judicial branch, judges, justices, and staff safe. And so I think we've been doing a pretty good job. Our stats actually are up from last year, even though we have very minimal in-person stats, but our phone call and email stats are up probably, I think the last time I looked, maybe 20%. So we're continuing, people are finding us, we're continuing to help people find information. So that's really good. And as you can see, I'm at home. We have these soft phones, and so we can take calls and make calls from home without people knowing that we're at home. So I think we're doing a good job. And one thing that Maggie and Olivia, that you both, I think, touched on is that, even after COVID, I really see now that it's particularly for our librarians, it's very possible for people to work from home. And when you work in the government, you don't have a lot of perks to give out, unlike if you worked in the corporate setting. And so if one of the perks that I can provide is that people can work from home a couple days a week, I'm all for that. If that's something that people like, it's nice for me. I live in Northfield. It's a long drive for me to go to St. Paul, and I love that I can take a walk, at noon with my husband, and so it's something that I think will continue in some way even after the pandemic is over.
That's a good point. And I've actually
I think
heard
that's been sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. Go ahead, Maggie.
I was going to say, I think that's been a part of the learning curve from working from home, is that I think there are staff who are just thriving being at home, and there are staff who are really struggling, that would feel better working in the office. And so I think I would agree with Liz. I think we've shown that we can do this work from home if we need to, and I think what staff would really appreciate is the flexibility to choose. It's everybody's mental health is in a different place right now, and everybody's coping in a different way. So trying to find ways to continue to work together and support everybody where they happen to be. It's a steep curve sometimes. So
I think you're right, that it is a whole new way of doing things. And, we're a tiny office of 2+ super part-time person. And even before all this, we kept thinking, we could probably work from our cars if we had to. We could park at the public library parking lot and use their internet. And so now, as we look going forward, we're thinking, we just renewed our lease for what amounts to extremely expensive storage space right now. And, we share expenses with Melsa, and they're kind of in the same situation. So I think it'll be interesting to see who the people we know that are thriving at home, and who are those that like that hybrid. I vote for hybrid personally, but I know not everyone thinks like that. And to see how we'll gather that information and how we'll be able to apply it going forward. And as Olivia pointed out, this real life librarianship, when we would have in-person wind downs, if we had 10 people, we thought, wow, this is a big success. The academic librarian panel had 80 people. It's
Wow.
like, where did all these people come from? And we're able to invite people from far away. So one of Olivia's library school classmates works for NASA in somewhere, Greenbelt, Maryland, probably. And so she was on our special librarians panel. Well, I just don't think she would have been on that panel if we had held it, at Miriam Park Public Library or wherever. So I think it's amazing that it took Metronet this long to think, well, online's not so bad. We do pride ourselves on the face-to-face. We like that. But weighing the pros and cons, I think will be a project going forward.
And I miss it, I will say. I mean, going to different locations and seeing people face to face, and of course, cookies. No one brings me cookies when I do these webinar events.
That's right. We did always have cookies. And the person I feel the most sympathy for is our new part-time person who is a library school student. And she replaced another library school student that we have, who now works at the Legislative Reference Library. And what she misses is that constant conversation about libraries in Minnesota, which happens at Metronet, because people come and go, they use our meeting room, things are happening, we do a lot of planning. And she really, I think, is missing all that, which is too bad. And, it's hard to incorporate that in. She only works a couple hours, she works 10 hours a week. So even doing that in the office, it might have been less than when Laura was there, but still, she's the one that I have the most sympathy for in this. And she, of course, we hired her online. I've met her face to face once, so all that, would I recognize her on the street? Not sure. I think so. Anyway.
I'm feeling a little bit for Maggie too, who still hasn't met some of her actual staff. So.
I did one of the, I met one-on-one with every staff member last spring and over the summer. So I haven't met them in person. I have met them. So
we did actually get a couple more questions, and these are about the technology for this remote working. Did you need to do any upgrades to allow for all the remote access, and how is tech support being handled in the pandemic? So Maggie?
We have a fabulous IT staff at Minitex, and they very quickly were able to, even before we got the orders to go home, they had already started getting people prepared and equipment prepared for people to work from home. So it was a fairly easy, I think, deployment of getting everybody at home. We also use number of different resources to stay in communication with each other. So we use Slack a lot. Everybody has a Slack account at Minitex. We use email. So the IT support is very easy to get in touch with if you do have questions or concerns. So yeah, the support is there for our IT, and they're doing great stuff, and they launched a new website. They're working on some internal things. They while supporting all of us working from home. So they did a fabulous job.
Glad to hear it. And is it just me, or is Slack like the worst named social media ever? Like you actually said we Slack a lot, which I knew what you meant, but
right, yeah, I'm a Slacker now, Olivia.
Right.
So
everyone at Minitex is apparently. And Liz, how about the technology for you?
We have the judicial branch has its own IT department, and when this all kind of started coming down the pike, they had to really move to get laptops for almost everybody like thousands of people. And so some of us had laptops already, but most of our librarians had desktops. And so it was just kind of like everybody was getting laptops set up. Everybody was getting these little headphones. We were getting luckily the judicial branch had changed from like hard plug-in phones to VoIP phones. And so that had already happened. And so then it was just a matter of like getting people to understand how to use their soft phone at home versus at the office. We had a few more issues with our law library service to prisoners group because they have a shared line that the prisoners can call. And so that was a little bit more difficult. We had to get them a couple of different phone setups so that, and I'm not sure exactly why, because it was too complicated for me to understand, but yeah, it's been pretty good. You know, we already had online access to a lot of our legal resources. So it was not that painful.
That's great to hear. We can all do so much when we are just thrown these challenges, right? So let's talk a little bit about hiring for roles in your organizations. So I'm sure that you guys do the hiring, and now Maggie, I know you've probably got an interesting, maybe haven't hired anyone during the pandemic, but what are you looking for in a candidate beyond the requirements for the job? And also, what is the hiring process like? So Liz, I'll let you start.
Well, you know, it kind of depends on, we have 3 departments. We have the law library service to prisoners group. We have the public services, and then we have technical services. And so the department heads that oversee those groups, you know, are going to lead the hiring. You know, in the past, we always had, you know, typically we do 2 interviews, and we certainly would want the applicant to be able to come to the state law library to see the space, to see the workspace, and also to be able to meet, you know, potential colleagues. I'd say it's, you know, kind of a pretty standard process. The only exception would be when we hired our outreach librarian, I did have those candidates do a presentation. People who are in the academic world are kind of used to doing that, but it's not probably all that common when you're applying for a public librarian position. But I wanted somebody who could get up, obviously, in front of a room and present, because that's what she was going to be doing. And so that was kind of the only, you know, maybe oddball thing that we do in hiring. But, you know, with respect to the first part of your question, you know, we have certain things that we're looking for, you know, as far as like experience and education. But, you know, we want people who are going to work well with others, obviously. We want people that are going to understand and be comfortable with the fact that we have patrons who come in who are sometimes mentally ill. We have a lot of non-native English speakers that we assist, and so people need to kind of, you know, it's nice if we can hire somebody who has some experience working with groups, with diverse groups, and with folks that are different from them, and feel okay with that. But we also do there's a lot of collaborating in most of the positions. And so, you know, we also tend to look for people that have comfort level with collaborating with others in the job.
Great answer. Maggie.
I have not been through a hiring process other than my own at Minitex. We have been able to hire a couple of contract employees because our funding comes from the state and not the university. Even though there's a hiring pause at the university right now, we were able to hire some contract positions. I think, like Liz said, we're kind of a standard process for that. But beyond that, I cannot yet speak to the hiring process at Minitex.
Reasonable.
Well, I can speak to the Minitex hiring process only because I have been on 2 Minitex hiring committees. Both were very similar. They follow the structure of a typical academic library search, I think, in that, you know, the jobs are advertised, the jobs are closed, every single resume that was submitted And one of the groups I was on was for the most recent reference and instruction librarian. It had 72 resumes received, which, okay, that is a lot of resumes to review. And some were easy. Those that began their cover letter, I'm applying for a job at the University of Minnesota Duluth. Okay, you're out, but and then, the committees meet, went over every single resume based on the criteria that was listed in the application. The other position was for the head of the DIME unit, Digital Instruction and Metadata Education. So that was a whole different level. And that one had international applicants. So it's like, can you be at Minitex at 6:30 in the morning for this call from somebody from the Middle East? And I'm thinking, why did I ever say yes to this? Can I just get an office at Minitex? So, I mean, it's a very interesting process, I think. And both of them involved presentations to, in the department head position, to the wide library community. Everyone was invited, the same way we were all invited to Maggie's presentation. For the reference and outreach person, that was just the committee and interested Minitex staff. So one thing I will say is, it sort of amazes me that anybody is ever hired at the University of Minnesota, because it takes forever. It's like, you think, okay, I'll be on this search committee, and how long can this take? I think for the DIME position, it was 9 or 10 months.
Oh my God.
From the beginning to the end. Less so, a shorter position, period of time for the ROI position, but even so, and I remember one of the candidates said to Matt Lee, who would be this individual super, sometimes I've been offered the job on my way home from the interview. Yeah, that's not happening here. So, and I don't think that's atypical for a government position. When I worked at the state library and I applied to work at the state library, I probably applied in October, maybe November. I got a call in April to say, can you come for an interview? And it's like, who are you people? I've long moved on from this. So government structure is different than, say, corporate.
I think that to follow up with Anne and Liz, what they were saying too, I think that it has been my experience at Anoka County that it's been my experience that an academic library interviews tend to be more robust than, I think,
longer,
with presentations and meeting lots of different committees and that kind of thing. And I think public libraries are starting to do that a little bit, not quite to the extent of academic libraries, but the county, we started having presentations and meeting with different groups of staff for candidates as well. And I would think, I would make the argument too that the higher up that you go in the managerial structure of the library, regardless of what that is, that presentation piece and meeting with lots of different constituents would be part of most interviews.
I think that's probably true. And I think it's a good thing to expand maybe the public library interview process, certainly to include the presentation part to some extent, because we've all been to presentations at various conferences and you think, okay, I could help you if only you would let me. How to do a presentation, how to do public speaking, how to answer the questions that the audience asks. I think we should do a webinar on this because people, it's like, you never thought of the questions that people were going to ask you. You need to do a little anticipation here. And I agree. I think the academic ones, it's grueling to be hired as an academic librarian in the sense it can last multiple days. On the one for the DIME job, it was from 8:30 in the morning until 5:30 in the afternoon when I finally was getting in my car at the parking lot, and I'm thinking, I'm exhausted and I didn't have to do anything, just had to be there. So it's hard work, and all those blog posts and articles you read about, how to prepare for your academic, go to the bathroom when you can. Don't forget to eat, to drink and eat, and ask for time during the day, because I don't think it's really supposed to be so grueling that it's the last candidate standing who gets the job. So anyway, it's tough though, and start applying now if you're thinking of moving into any, because it could take a while.
Thanks, Anne. So let's talk about some fun stuff. What is the best thing about your job? But also, what is the worst thing about your job? Liz.
The best thing about my job is that we are providing assistance to people that are oftentimes in crisis, and they have nowhere else to go. And the worst part of my job is that, and this is from a librarian perspective, not from a director perspective, but the toughest thing is that as librarians, we want to answer the question. We want to find the solution. And with legal questions, we can't give legal advice, even though many of us are attorneys. As court employees, we cannot give legal advice. As librarians, we can't give legal advice. And so, sometimes people are unsatisfied with what we have to provide them. And so that can be frustrating when somebody really, really needs much more than what we can provide. My goal is always that we move them a little bit farther ahead than they were before, even if we can't get them to the end. If we can provide them a little bit more information than they had before, they're better off. And often we talk to people on the phone that say, you're like the 10th person I've called. Nobody answers the phone anywhere now during the pandemic. So people are happy that actually we have people that answer the phone. So yeah, it's a very fulfilling job to be able to assist people and to assist the court with, real life cases that are being decided that are going to become part of precedent in Minnesota law. And our librarians are there to kind of help find any nugget that might be legally relevant for the law clerks. So it's it's a great job.
Maggie.
Let's say the best thing about my job is twofold. It's the staff that I work with they're just really fabulous. But it is even though it might seem like we just move a lot of books around or share articles, there are people at the end of that who are relying on library staff and on Minitech staff and have a need for that information. And it's very satisfying to be able to provide that to them, and to provide librarians and museums and cultural organizations that we work with, so Digital Library, provide them with the support they need to advance their institutions as well. It's just really neat to see how we can support communities and really help them thrive. And I'm not sure I have a worse thing yet, so I just have the best thing right now. Worst thing about my job, I don't know what that is yet.
That is reasonable. We do have another question. Can you direct them to access other resources? I'm guessing that was for Liz when you were talking about that you can't give them legal advice. I'm assuming that you do direct them to other resources?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what we try to do with every question is provide people with information about their situation. So if somebody's calling and they need help doing a modification of custody, we will find them information that is written for non-attorneys that will help them understand what the process is. We'll direct them to the court forms that they need to, if they're going to try to do it themselves. And if they want to find an attorney, we will refer them to some place where they can either connect with legal aid or they can connect with a private attorney. So yeah, that's absolutely a big part of what we do, is providing them with resources and then referring them to other places that can provide them legal advice if that's what they need.
Great. And we have another question, which is, have requests from K-12 plus higher education requests increased during COVID? That seems unclear to me. Was that cleared up to you? Sally, tell me what you meant by that. More requests from schools now.
But to whom?
That-
I would expect that Minitex might have an increase in requests from K-12 and higher ed, but maybe the law library too, as parents or teachers are interested in the legal ramifications of distance learning, whatever they might be. So I'm sure.
Right. Yes, that one was directed at you, Maggie. Have you received an increase in requests from schools during this time?
We have seen a marked increase, as Liz did, in people accessing the 24/7 chat reference service, the Ask Min service. That has really gone through the roof. We have seen a decrease in the number of decrease in usage of the statewide databases, and we're thinking that part of that is teachers are teaching in a crisis mode to trying to figure out remote learning, and so they're just don't maybe have the capacity or the bandwidth right now to as they're trying to learn a new environment that they're teaching kids. So we haven't seen an increase in the database usage, but we have seen an increase in the Ask Min usage. The other usage of like resource sharing and delivery dropped way off, well, because Minitex was closed for a period of weeks right at the beginning here. As libraries slowly came back online, they may have their collections closed to the public or to their students. So it or they might just be doing curbside pickup. So so our numbers are just now starting to pick up a little bit for resource sharing and delivery, as other libraries make shifts in how they are operating around the state. So we've been trying to take a lot of cues from what people are going through in their communities and trying to support that, and trying to shift and adjust it as necessary.
I would think eBooks Minnesota usage might have
eBooks Minnesota
increased.
usage has really increased. I think part of that was due to the Minnesota Center for the Book and the state book club that's been going on. But yes, the ebook usage has increased. Mm-hmm.
Great. So tell us a little bit about social media in your jobs. Is that something that you as the director handles, or is it something that is staffed out? And how does it benefit your job or your organization? Maggie.
We have a couple of different accounts, a couple of different Facebook accounts for Minnesota Digital Library and for Minitex. There's also a Twitter account for each of those, and we just started an Instagram account for the Minnesota Digital Library, and that has become increasingly popular. We've only had it just a couple of months, maybe not long at all. So there are staff from those departments that manage what's being posted on social media. I tend, on a personal level, I tend not to use it all that much myself. I kind of lurk and see what the trends are and what people are talking about, but I don't use it all that much for my job. But I think it is a critical, still a critical component of getting information out to people and sharing collections and sharing resources. So it is a good thing to keep to have. I just don't always use it myself. So.
Perfectly fair. And I love the MDL Instagram account, by the way. It's fabulous. For those of you who don't follow it, you should. It's pretty cool. Liz, how about you?
So the State Law Library has a Facebook and a Twitter account, and I wouldn't say that we're super active on social media. We're part of the court system, and so we have to be very, very careful about having everything that we do has to be very nonpartisan and very non-controversial. So, you know, sometimes there are things that I would like to get the information out. I don't know about Twitter, so I send it to one of the librarians and they tweet it out. Like a couple of weeks ago, we had a decision. The Supreme Court upheld the revenge porn statute. That was kind of a big deal. And so I did ask for one of our librarians to tweet that opinion out. You know, if there's ever anything that's kind of interesting that the court is doing, we'll post that. You know, if we have some kind of a new database, we'll put that on social media, but I wouldn't say we're super active with it. It's hard to know with the law library what people are going to really be interested in.
Oh, Sally, the Minnesota Digital Library Instagram account, Sally wanted me to repeat that. I'm literally going to look it up. I don't know if you know the name of it offhand, Maggie.
Oh, don't put me on the spot like that. No.
Well, I'm looking too. It's okay. It's MNDIG Library. So MnDig Library, MNDIG Library on Instagram. And they post just a lot of really cool old photos that are taken from the Minnesota Digital Library. It's really fun to follow and take a look at. So
thank you. Appreciate that little plug, Olivia.
Happy to help. Okay. And Anne has posted it in the chat. Thank you very much, Anne. All right. So let's talk about professional organizations. I know that there are professional organizations for your job, for your organization. Do you belong to them? And what benefit do you think that this adds to your job, Liz?
Yes. We have the Minnesota Association of Law Libraries, the American Association of Law Libraries. I belong to both of those, in addition to the Minnesota State Bar Association. And there are various other organizations that other people at the State Law Library belong to. We have people that belong to SLA. We have people that belong to MLA. People that belong to different groups relating to technical services that I, don't know a whole lot about. So for me, I think it's really a benefit to be involved in the profession and to be getting to know your colleagues and to be learning from things that they know that you don't know. And so I really encourage our folks to volunteer for committees and join organizations. And we're pretty good about being able to pay for things like that. Out-of-state travel has been banned for a while. So getting people to conferences out of state is difficult. But if people want to go to MLA or they want to go to another conference in Minnesota, that's typically not a problem. So yeah, I think professional development and being involved in professional organizations is really useful for education and also just for networking.
Great. And Maggie?
And I would second everything Liz said, that there's all kinds of organizations that it's really important to be involved in. I think the Minnesota Library Association, I'm a member of the Public Library Association and also the American Library Association. And it's just good to build up those networks and to learn from each other and to share with each other. There's also an international coalition of library consortia that Minitech's staff are involved with and pay attention to, and it's just good to learn from each other and share those ideas. So we do have a lot of staff who do a lot of presentations at those conferences, but also those networks that we can rely on for other purposes as well. And I think talking about a path to jobs, I think I was involved with the Minnesota Library Association for quite a long time with conference planning, but then was also on the board for 3 years, serving 1 year as president. And I think that gives you a different sense too of, as we're talking about running a statewide organization, I think that gives you a good perspective on that as well. And I think that really has helped, me in this position too, that have learned from those folks who served with me, but also have a better understanding of the different types of libraries that are in Minnesota and how they work together. And so I would encourage you to be involved in the organizations where you can.
Great. I agree. I think Metronet shares that same philosophy of joining the organization and being involved. And that's a question that we include every time we do this. And I will say, I don't think hardly ever we've heard anything to the contrary. Pretty much that's universally accepted that, you know, these organizations are there for you to take advantage of, and you should be doing that. So
yeah.
Definitely agree with that one.
And I'll be curious to see, quite honestly, how those organizations change and shift because of the pandemic. I think like this conversation that we're having today, more people can join because it's virtual, but yet there are people in the Minnesota Library Association that I only see one time a year, and that's at the conference. And so not having those hallway conversations or those lunch conversations, I think has been a challenge. And so there's pros and cons to meeting in person like that now, or, you know, to trying to figure out what is the future of conferences and how do you manage those. And
I agree. I attended MLA this past fall, and I thought the content was outstanding. They did an excellent job. The technology worked seamlessly. The presentation I was part of, it went smoothly. We had a great moderator, but at the end of the day, it was extremely anticlimactic in the sense that, okay, now what? I had the same dinner with my same husband that I've had every day since the beginning of the pandemic. You know, I didn't get to meet anybody new, you know, the way you do when you just pick an empty chair at the table at lunch or another event and talk to the people on either side of you. I think personally, that's one of the most valuable and most enjoyable parts of going to a conference, whether it's here in Minnesota or wherever. And I don't see how that can easily be replicated. Even the experience of the exhibits. I attended ALA online too when they made that possible last spring or summer. And it was like, you know, going to the exhibits is one thing in person. You know, choosing to go to the exhibit, it's not the same.
no.
And I can't imagine that exhibitors just really think it's a great replacement. So I, for one, am hoping ALA actually takes place in June in person. We'll see. And I certainly hope MLA is able to return too. And I think it's possible to do a hybrid, to make it possible for those who can't come from Rochester to Duluth or from Duluth to St. Paul to participate in an online environment so that it does broaden it. But really it was like, now what? I'm done here. I've learned a whole lot. I don't even have anybody to talk to about it. You know, I mean, I could have called Olivia, or I could have called, you know, Ann Hoganson, any number of people in the library world, but it's not the same.
Yeah, I have.
She did call Olivia. Okay.
Okay, I called Olivia.
I will say I agree about the exhibitors. I actually use the meeting the exhibitors as the chance to practice my elevator speech, because no one ever knows what Metronet is. And so I find that I'm constantly having to explain that. And it's a really good opportunity to just walk up to someone and, you know, explain what I do and practice that speech until I've got it down pat. So that's definitely something that I miss. I think I've got it down now, but still, it's something that I miss.
Yeah.
You know, and I have to agree with Anne about the sitting down at a table with an empty seat. I force myself. I mean, I'm an introvert, but I really force myself to sit down at a table with people I don't know. I never regret it because librarians are not mean, and so it's just, as much as it's can be very intimidating. If there's anybody in this program that's a newbie and hasn't been to a conference, when you go to your next conference, try to do that. Try not to sit down with people that you already know, because it's just such a great way to meet really interesting, wonderful people. And I just really always appreciate that opportunity.
I think that's great advice. Don't sit with people you know. Don't hang out with people you know. I mean, if it's somebody like Maggie mentioned, I see him once a year, and I want to catch up. That's kind of different, but otherwise, scan the room and choose a table that you only know maybe one person, and then don't sit next to them, kind of thing, so that you do have that. I will say, in Minnesota, certainly, it's very easy to become involved in the library organizations, whether it's ITEM, the school librarians, or whether it is MLA. I mean, people want you on their committee. I used to say, don't sit by me when I was on the board, don't sit by me if you don't want to be impressed into a volunteer position, because, well, what can I do to help? Well, let me tell you, here's a whole list of things. Because all those new ideas, all those new connections benefit the association to really an unmeasurable degree, So don't be shy if you're a new person to Minnesota, or if you are a student, join. It's cheap as a student to join. I think this used to be true. If you were a student member of MLA, you were automatically a student member of ALA.
Wow,
So
that's a great deal.
that is a great deal. And I've been trying to track that down, and no one seems to know the answer, but I think it's still true because we're a chapter. MLA is a chapter of ALA. So do it. And I think the future of association depends on new membership, And when Jen Nelson moves to New Jersey, the first thing she's going to do is write her check to the New Jersey Library Association.
I bet she's done it already.
Probably. And the School Librarians Association, they have a great school librarian association in New Jersey. Anyway, join and participate.
And will someone who has more creative ability than me make a bumper sticker or a button that says librarians are not mean? I thought that was so awesome. I would totally buy one of those if I found one. Librarians are not mean. They're awesome. Okay, this is a really good segue actually into our next question, which is for each of you to talk to us a little bit about the Minnesota library community. What is the role of your organization in the community? How do you yourself contribute? And how?
Oh, we lost the whole last part of that question, Olivia. We lost the sound for you, Olivia, on the last part of the question.
Olivia might be frozen. Oh, nope, I saw her blink.
Am I back?
She's back.
Okay, I was just typing, I think I'm frozen into the chat, but then I popped back in, so. Okay, how much of that did you hear? It's always weird, where did you cut out? I'll just start from the top. Here's the question. So talk to us about the Minnesota library community. What is the role of your organization in the community? How do you see yourself contributing, and how does the community affect your job or your organization? Maggie.
Why are you giving the hard questions to me?
I'm going back and forth. I don't know if you've noticed that. There's only two of you. So Liz start one and you start the next one.
So how do we fit within the Minnesota library community?
Yes, how does Minitex fit within the community, and how does that impact Minitex, and how does it impact you as the director?
I have come to see Minitex as kind of the backbone of the Minnesota library community. So we run a lot of services that that communities and schools and academic institutions and cultural institutions rely upon. It is for the delivery, for the databases, we're kind of in some ways behind the scenes, keeping everything running. And our reference outreach and instruction staff do a lot of work on professional development, not just the reference outreach instruction, but we do a lot of professional development in supporting libraries. And so when something is going on in the library community, we can figure out a way to respond to that and to support libraries and support their communities as they try to move forward through. So we do a lot of work with them. Outreach, before the pandemic, a lot of staff did site visits, would go out regularly to do training just to be out in the community and to learn from and support libraries and librarians. So I see my own role as part of that once we do get to travel again, to be out listening, to hear what's going on, to learn what the trends are, what the needs are, so that Minitex can formulate a response to that with the community and for the community.
Great answer. Liz?
I would say that personally in my role, I'm not as tied into the library community as I am more the legal community, but there are many people who work at the State Law Library that are part of committees and leadership in some of the library community organizations like MLA mostly. But then there are other things like our head of technical services is part of TCART, which has to do with preservation, I think.
Archivists.
Archivists, yes, thank you. And so I think there's more opportunity with the other folks in the library to get involved in more of the library activities, the library organizations. As I mentioned at the beginning, one of the things that I like to do for outreach is to travel to public libraries and present. And then also one of the things that I like to make sure people understand is that you can always refer those legal questions to us. Either you as the librarian can call or email us, or you can give the public library patron our phone number or email, and we'll take it from there. So that's probably the connection that we have.
Wonderful. I will say TCART, the archivists group, has gotten a plug in almost every session that we've done. We've only
That's
done
funny.
one for archivists, but they must have a huge roster of people.
Wow.
A lot of TCART mentions in this panel.
That's funny.
Okay, so let's talk about the future a little bit, do a little fortune telling. So I'm curious what you see as the future for your organization in the library world. Are you here to stay? Are you permanent? Do you see changes that are coming? What does the future landscape look like for you? Liz?
I don't spend a lot of time worrying about our future because more and more people are going to court without attorneys, and those folks need assistance finding legal information, figuring out how to handle the process, how to find forms. That's only going to increase, and that's a role that we play. The court is going to continue to need resources, legal resources, and in the last couple of years, we've really done a push to increase our outreach to the district court law clerks. So these are the law clerks that are all over the state, in all of the 92 courthouses in the state. You have a situation like in Cook and Lake County where there's one law clerk that covers both of those counties. And so if he gets a tricky research question, if they get something weird comes into court that his judge doesn't know anything about, I mean, we're the resource for them, even though we're down in St. Paul. So I don't worry too much about it. I think the change that I would envision is that we likely will have less space because we have a huge location. If anybody's ever been there before, we pay about $62,000 a month in rent to the state of Minnesota for our space. Because it's big. It was built in '92, back when everything was in print. And we still have a lot of print, but we have more print than we probably need. And if the court would let me get rid of more of it, I would. So I imagine we'll end up with a smaller footprint at some point. But the State Law Library, I should have maybe started with this, but is the oldest library in Minnesota.
Wow.
It's the longest, it's the oldest continuing library in Minnesota. It was actually created with the Act of Congress that created the territory of Minnesota. So the state law library has been around for a long time, 1849. I'm not worried that we're going anywhere.
Good to know. Maggie, how about Minitex?
We have, so our funding comes from the state through the Office of Higher Education. And then we also have some funding through State Library Services, the LSTA program, that's some of our resources. And so, so we're always kind of paying attention to what the political landscape looks like and that funding. Some other trends, though, that we are keeping an eye on and in some cases actively working toward are around cooperative collection management that the 18 or so academic libraries have agreed to this past year. And so like Liz mentioned, they've got a lot of books that they may not need anymore. So they are actively working together to manage their collections, to guarantee if it's the last copy in Minnesota, somebody's going to keep it somewhere. So we're working with them on that to kind of manage that project and those conversations. We're also paying attention to open access textbooks and what does that mean for, again, academic libraries, but school libraries as well. Is there ways to, as things become more digital, to support learners, save some money for students and for some schools and see what we can do around that. We're also talking, some staff are paying attention to controlled digital lending. So are there ways that we can lend ebooks if ebooks are going to be a bigger part of the collection? Is there a way to share those around the state? So I don't have a crystal ball with a clear view, but so those are kinds of some of the trends that we're paying attention to and watching, and knowing that if print collections become smaller, that impacts our delivery services. So how do we work with that? How do we provide more professional development for teachers or for librarians around the state around digital services or other issues around digital lending or digital services. So.
Good. Those are all very exciting, I think, things to be looking forward to. So I'm assuming when you guys took these jobs that you had some idea what you were signing up for. So I would like to know something that surprised you about your job after you'd been at it for a bit of time. And Maggie, you get to go first again.
And you can't say pandemic.
No, I wouldn't say pandemic. Surprised, I shouldn't have been surprised, but the impact that Minitex has had on libraries around the state, but also across the country. So this past year, our cooperative purchasing staff worked with a library in every state. And so the Minitex reach is broad, and that was just really neat to see that the number of things that staff are involved with.
That is surprising and great to hear. Mm-hmm. How about you, Liz?
You know, gosh, there were so many things that I didn't know, mostly about the working for the court system. You know, it was just very different from working at any other type of library. You know, I report to the Supreme Court, and so every quarter I go in front of the Supreme Court and I give my report about what the state law library is doing. So it's been interesting to kind of get to know the justices on the Supreme Court. One of the things that I really didn't understand until I came to work there was that, you know, lawyers tend to think of district court, which is a trial court, and then the appellate courts. And so the appellate courts are the Court of Appeal in the Supreme Court in Minnesota. And I was kind of thought of them as the appellate courts. They're a group, and they're very, very separate. And which makes sense by design. They're very separate because, cases from the Court of Appeals might end up in the Supreme Court. And so there needs to be, a pretty clear division. And so in our building, the Court of Appeals live on the second and third floor, and the Supreme Court lives on the fourth floor. And there's no going up and down in the floors. The Court of Appeals has a little library. The Supreme Court has a little library. Of course, our library is also there, and we have everything, everything else. But they definitely have a very strong kind of division between the two appellate courts, just for conflict reasons.
Interesting. That is not information that I had previously. So
yeah.
Okay. We are actually winding down. We only have a couple of questions left. So again, if you are listening, feel free to shoot in some questions if you've got them. But now I'd like you to give us a funny story about your job. It doesn't have to be funny. It can be anything. It can be intriguing. It can be a mystery. It can be anything that you think. Just a story that's like a go-to when you're out with your friends and this is my go-to work story. Share something with us. Liz.
And I have nothing to say. I can't. I'm sure I have a ton of stories, and I can't think of anything right now. Other than we have potentially armed folks coming to our workplace potentially next week. So working at the Capitol complex is interesting. For those of you that don't know, we're across the Cedar Street from the Capitol, and when the George Floyd protests were going on, there were tanks surrounding the state capitol, and there were state patrol, because the state patrol has oversight over the security for the Capitol complex. And even just this week, I had to show my badge to get onto Cedar Avenue to get to my building, because all of the streets were blocked off that go to the Capitol. So it's a little unsettling sometimes that things happen at the Capitol, and you might not know, but you can bring your gun into the Capitol, and so that's a little bit nerve-wracking sometimes. Our building does not allow weapons, but for the history of the building, there has never been any weapon screening, unlike most courthouses. We're actually in the process of having weapon screening added. So that's actually one thing. I mean, it's not a funny story, but I mean, it's just that kind of the reality of working in a courthouse is, we have active shooter drills, and we talk about how can we escape and where can you hide if you hear shots and things like that. So it's, I don't know if that happens in regular public libraries or not, but it certainly happens in our library because of where we live.
Well, the stories didn't have to be funny. That one was certainly interesting, though. I mean,
sorry, not like jovial or humorous, but reality.
I can't top tanks. I can't top tanks on the lawn. Sorry.
Who could really?
So, one story I have told a couple of times. When I was at Anoka County, I had the opportunity to, we built a new library, and as part of the design process for that, I jokingly kept asking for a 750,000 volume underground book vault with automatic retrieval system, which I did not get. But one of the first emails that I sent when I got to Minitex was to one of the facilities managers at the county who worked on that project with me, to say Minitex staff manage the Minnesota Library Access Center, the caverns there at the university. And so I now have a 1.5 million volume underground book vault. And
it's super cool.
It is super cool.
It is super cool.
Yes, we agree. If they open back up for tours, people should go see that. It's so cool.
Yeah.
We take our Secrets of the Library class to MLAC every time, and these tend to be senior citizens and library lovers and know everything they can think of about their public library. But we show them MLAC, and it's like, holy Toledo! Everybody says Ark of the Covenant, and soothes their ruffled feathers over the conversation about weeding.
Oh,
Sure.
So everybody, oh, well, you know, what if the last copy of Pride and Prejudice is weeded, which really is never happening. But we can say to them, there will be one in MLAC, don't worry.
I'll just mention that I forgot something that you said, Maggie, about the last book. I used to be on the Policy Advisory Council back when Valerie was the director. Minitex is so awesome. It's just it's amazing the things that you all do. But that last book project that you were talking about is just, it's so important, and it's something that I think, you know, a lot of libraries maybe aren't even thinking about. I mean, for us, we have a lot of weird stuff. If it's Minnesota law, we keep it forever. Like, we're never going to get rid of it. But we're very conscious about when we do weeding, we check WorldCat to see who else has it. And we actually had something that was going to get weeded a couple weeks ago. There were two copies in WorldCat.
Wow.
It wasn't something that really fit our collection development policy, so we were going to send it somewhere else that's more appropriate to have it. But I'm really glad that that's something that Minitex is thinking about, because I think it's really important.
Yeah, there's a lot of years of labor and effort and energy and funding that has gone into these collections, and that it's part of our shared history, and it's interesting to think about as we've just rushed to move everything online. What does that mean for our legacy collections?
Okay. Final question. What did you not learn in library school that you wish you had? And Liz, you're up first.
So I would say that I went to library school with a little bit of a bad attitude, because I went to law school first, and I'm like, I'm going to be a law librarian. What do I need to learn about cataloging and like OPACs and things like that? And so I guess what I would say is I learned more in library school than I ever thought I would need to use later. And I'm very grateful, particularly as a director, that I did take all of those classes that I thought would have nothing to do with my future life as a law librarian. So I can't think of anything that I wish I would have learned, but I would say that I learned a lot more that was useful than what I had thought at the time. So I'm really glad I went to library school, even though I grumbled about it at the time.
That's a great answer. Maggie, how about you?
I think I went to library school a long time ago, back in the glory days of reference, and so it took a lot of reference classes. There was not a lot of offered around management of people or management of budgets, and so some of that just comes with experience, but some, particularly around the budgeting, really had to learn that on the job, and
Yeah.
we have a lot of background for that. Would have been, although first job out of library school, I didn't need to know how the budget worked necessarily, but that would have been helpful to know.
I agree. I think that's great. So if you're listening to this and you're in library school, start thinking about stuff like that. Ask someone to teach you about budgets while you're in library school.
Or at least ask them to teach you how to read a spreadsheet, you know,
Right.
and a profit and loss statement, or whatever your organization calls that. Where are we into our year, and what's left in this category, and how do you move it around? Because I do think, and I went to library school way long time ago, and before there were databases, just to give you an example. And we talked about it, but you know, I think the assumption, at least then and maybe still, is not everybody's going to be a library director. So we focus on those core skills of librarianship, whether it's cataloging or reference, intellectual freedom, that sort of thing. But I think the management of people certainly could be expanded in all library schools, because even if you are not a line manager, I'm not, you know, if you're not supervising people directly, you still have to learn how to manage your coworkers. so that we all
Learn
know
how to manage up too.
Right, learn how to manage up, manage linearly, so that we all know how to collaborate. That's something they could teach in library school, or screen for in admission to library school, who is a collaborator and who isn't. My favorite New Yorker cartoon is two guys sitting at a desk and one says to the other, "This collaboration would be a whole lot easier without you." And I think that tends to be the attitude among, I can just do it myself. It will be faster, it'll be more efficient, but it won't necessarily be better if it's just me. I personally think I can do everything by myself. And I know that that the end result will not be as great as if I can convince other people to collaborate with me. And I think that's overlooked in library school, is that, it's not whether you love to read or everything there is to know about books or how to do a reference interview. It's that you know how to be part of a group, and that you know how to work as part of a group. Because some days you'll be the leader and other days you'll be the follower, So almost project management type skills, I think. And I see Minitex is going to help us with that, with the new project management series. So that's a good step in the right direction. But that everybody should have some kind of project management group work experience that translates into their day-to-day life when they actually get a library job.
But I think, Liz was speaking earlier about the working with the public and the issues and concerns and challenges that they're coming to you to help solve. And just being able to relate to people is a skill that, again, can be honed on the job, but knowing going into it that when you work with the public, that means everybody in the public, and
That's right.
And you need to learn how to work with all of them.
Right. And I don't think that is necessarily well addressed in library school at this point. Some of those softer skills like that are harder to teach, but at least introduce the idea that you never know who's coming to that desk, and what their needs are going to be, and how angry they are when they get there, which happens. So
Yeah.
Anyway, interesting.
Okay. To our attendees, this is last call for questions to any of our panelists. That includes both Anne and myself, by the way. If you have a question for either of us, we'd be happy to answer it, but also for Maggie and Liz. And of course, for Jen Nelson, who unfortunately was not able to participate throughout the entire event, I'm guessing because of technical difficulties at the airport. But if you have questions for Jen, go ahead and shoot them into the chat, and I will make sure to get you some answers for those. In the meantime, do Maggie or Liz have anything they would like to add? Anything we didn't cover that you really feel needs to be said?
I would just, I wanted to touch on something that Maggie and Anne both talked about just a little while ago, because I'm not sure who all is in the audience, if there are people that are looking to move up in libraries. If you are in a position and you would like to move laterally, or you would like to someday look to become a manager or a director at some point, I think it's a good idea to ask in your if you're working in a library, hey, could I job shadow a couple of days, in another department? Can you talk to me about how you do the budget? Can you talk to me about how the library does collection development? I mean, if there are pieces in the library that you just don't know anything about, but you feel like I really need to know more about those things, it certainly does not hurt to ask. I mean, it's possible that your director might be like, yeah, I'm not interested in talking to you about that. I would hope that most directors wouldn't do that, but then ask at another library, if you could come in and do an informational interview or do a job shadow. We have a couple of folks in our technical services department who both have been working on MLS degrees since they've been with us. One of them actually has our MLS. They're both in technical services, but they have an interest in public services. And so when we have our reference meeting, when all of the librarians are in the reference meeting, they do reference. They come out from technical services and we put them at the reference desk. So then when they go to apply for that reference position, they can say, I have experience doing reference. So don't be afraid to think outside of the box. If you feel like there's a gap in what you want to know or what you think you need to know to move to the next job, try to find a way to get some experience in that thing that you think you're missing.
Librarians are not mean people. They will.
That's right. Librarians are not
They
mean.
will help you out.
That was a question we've gotten a couple different times on these panels. Like, what if I want to be an archivist, or what if I want to be a cataloger? And I don't have that experience. How do I get that? And I mean, I do think Liz's suggestions are valuable for that. You do, it's not going to come to you. You have to go to it. And, Olivia and I know a whole lot of people. And so that if you don't know somebody that you could talk to, you could get in touch with either of us and we could say, well, we can introduce you to somebody who knows cataloging or knows reference or knows how to manage a delivery system or whatever. And we're more than happy. One of the big things that Metronet does, or we think of as one of our big roles, is that connecting people with services they need, but also connecting librarians with one another, collecting librarians, particularly with information they need to do their jobs better. So keep us in mind too, if you don't know anybody that could, or you're reluctant to, well, I can't call the state law librarian. Well, I can call the state law librarian on your behalf, or send her that introductory email. So
now you've all met her on this panel, so now you guys can
Right.
call her. She'd be fine with it.
So I think we're ahead of schedule because we missed all Jen Nelson's answers, which is kind of unfortunate because the state library and state library services offers interesting services, but Jen herself is very interesting. It would have been interesting to hear more about her path to state librarian and her path from state librarian to New Jersey state librarian, which just between us is going to be a huge change.
They actually have a library.
They actually have a library.
Yeah, they have a state library.
And they have a fairly not large, but they have a big staff with different responsibilities in our state library. I worked at our state library and I thought, this is not really a state library. It's very different than any other state. I worked at the State Library of Ohio too. Big library. So I think it'll be interesting to see and to hear. Keep in touch, Jen. Send us a postcard every so often.
Yes, and thanks for bringing that up, Andy. That is why we are running a little short. Normally we do the full 2 hours, but with only 2 panelists instead of 3, that is less time that we're spending chit-chatting. Maggie, was there anything you wanted to add?
I don't think so. I think you gave a robust list of questions. And
thank you.
I appreciate meeting everybody. And
yeah.
It's always great to hear about people.
Popping up that title card on the screen again for those of you in attendance. If you need that evaluation URL or want to see what's upcoming, in 2 weeks from today, we are doing small academic libraries. Our first ever event was academic libraries, but we are going to do littler schools this time and see what it's like if you're maybe the only academic librarian working in a college library. So it should be fun. Who do
we have? We have somebody from one of the tribal colleges.
Ooh.
Yes, Red Lake Nation Tribal College. His name is Jacob. Marcus Seraphine from Dunwoody. And I have not confirmed yet the third person. I have 2 people that I'm waiting to hear back from. So
okay,
the third will be a mystery.
Nice.
So my physical therapist said to me, I know a librarian. Well, that's nice. It's Marcus.
Oh, really?
Marcus from Dunwoody. Went to high school
We'll be on that panel in 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's what I said. So it's funny. Small world.
Yep.
And Liz and Maggie, thank you so much.
Thank
for
you
attending.
very much.
We're
Thank
fabulous,
you.
both of you.
Thanks for the opportunity. It was fun.
It's always nice how open people are with their information.
And I will send you both a link to the YouTube channel where we host these if you want to watch it or if you want to watch any of the others. So
great.
That'll be coming your
Share
way.
it with your staff or whomever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That would be great.
All right.
Okay, thanks again.
Thank
That's
you.
for us.
Hope to
Thank
see you in the
you.
real world.
Yeah, right.
And good luck, Liz. I hope everything is safe next week.
Thank you. Yeah, I imagine that probably be not a lot of people on campus.
Yeah, that's
Not a lot of
probably
people
wise.
working.
That's
Yeah.
probably wise. Work
Yeah,
at home
thank you, though.
that week, but
Yeah.
beware.
Mm-hmm.
The pictures today coming from the U.S. Capitol, frightening. I worked in D.C. and it's